An American diplomat has effectively warned Canada, buy our fighter jets, or we'll fly ours over your territory whenever we see fit. And at the same time, a small European country that already made the mistake of buying those very jets is now scrambling to warn us not to repeat it. I've been looking closely at what unfolded this week in Arizona, and you need to understand what this is really about. This is no longer a debate over defense procurement. This is a question of whether Canada still exercises control over Canadian airspace. At Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, January 2026, the U.S. ambassador to Canada stood before reporters. In his mind, he was probably applying routine diplomatic pressure, but what he actually said should alarm every Canadian who values sovereignty. He was asked what would happen if Canada chose not to buy 88 American-made F-35 fighter jets. His answer was simple: NORAD would need to be adjusted. Let me translate that. Buy our aircraft, or we'll restructure continental defense in a way that reflects your diminished authority. And it didn't stop there. The ambassador went on to explain that if Canada selected a different aircraft, the United States would be forced to buy more F-35s for its own Air Force and increase flights into Canadian airspace to respond to potential threats approaching the U.S. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. An American official openly stated that if Canada exercises its sovereign right to choose its own military equipment, the response will be more American military activity over Canadian territory. This is the line that kept me awake. Read it again. If we don't buy their product, they will simply fly over our country anyway. That isn't diplomacy, that's coercion, dressed up in bureaucratic language. Now here's where everything changes, because there's already a country living under the reality Canada is being pushed toward. A country that made the purchase. A country now urging us not to follow. That country is Denmark, a NATO ally, a founding member of the Western Alliance. And today, Denmark is in crisis mode. Here's the part few are discussing. Denmark bought the F-35. They committed fully. They accepted the same terms Washington is now demanding Canada accept. And the chair of Denmark's Parliamentary Defense Committee has now gone public with something that should be headline news in Canada. Rasmus Jarlov, one of the officials directly involved in approving Denmark's F-35 purchase, says the aircraft are grounded for maintenance roughly half the time, or more. His warning is blunt. The United States holds the power to cripple Denmark's Air Force simply by halting spare parts. Think about what that means. A NATO country whose entire Air Force can be grounded by a political decision made in Washington. That's not partnership. That's dependency engineered for leverage. And the timing makes this far more dangerous. As Denmark faces pressure from the Trump administration over Greenland, that leverage is no longer theoretical. The same government questioning Danish territorial integrity controls whether Denmark's fighter jets can fly. Reports now suggest Denmark regrets the F-35 purchase, but it has no alternative. The aircraft is its only operational fighter. They're locked in, and Canada is being invited to walk into the same trap. This is the same administration that floated annexing Greenland. The same president who repeatedly refers to Canada as a potential 51st state. The same White House that treats alliances as transactional tools rather than mutual commitments. When journalists asked the U.S. ambassador whether he understood why Canadians might view these comments as threatening, his response was dismissive. That's crazy, we're not a threat. Except he had just threatened to alter the Continental Defense Agreement and increase unilateral military flights over Canadian territory if Canada didn't buy American jets. That is the definition of a threat. Behind the scenes, officials are saying exactly that. Vincent Rigby, a former national security advisor with more than 3 decades in defense and diplomatic roles, has confirmed the remarks were a deliberate pressure tactic meant to force Canada's hand. And here's the unsettling truth. The United States doesn't need permission if it decides to act. We've seen this pattern before. American F-15s scrambled near Calgary after a bomb threat involving a German aircraft. An American F-22 shot down a balloon over the Yukon. Those were cooperative NORAD operations. What's being described now is something else entirely. Unilateral American action over Canadian territory. Not cooperation, but substitution. This is why the Canadian government is now seriously considering the Swedish-built Gripen fighter. And this is where the debate fundamentally shifts. This isn't about performance metrics, though the Gripen excels in Arctic environments. It isn't about cost, though it's far cheaper to operate. And it isn't about the 2021 competition, where the F-35 looked dominant on paper. This is about whether Canada accepts permanent dependence on a partner that has become politically unpredictable or chooses a system that comes without political strings attached. The ambassador dismissed the Gripen as inferior and insufficiently interoperable, but Rigby offers a very different assessment. The Gripen is a capable aircraft used by NATO allies and well-suited to Canada's geography. Here's the difference no one in Washington wants to highlight. Sweden doesn't threaten its customers. Sweden doesn't hint at annexation. Sweden doesn't use spare parts as political leverage. Sweden offers capability without coercion. And that's precisely what makes the Gripen dangerous to American interests. Now consider this number. Recent polling shows 72% of Canadians support incorporating the Gripen into Canada's fighter fleet, either fully or alongside the F-35. 72% understand something the U.S. ambassador apparently does not. Sovereignty matters more than interoperability when your partner treats you like a subordinate. Experts caution against public escalation, warning that open disputes weaken deterrence. But here's the question they must confront. What happens when the deterrence relationship itself becomes the threat to sovereignty? NORAD was built on partnership, mutual respect, shared authority. What was described in Arizona wasn't partnership, it was hierarchy. Accepting the F-35 under these conditions means four things. First, permanent dependence on American supply chains, something Denmark has already experienced. Second, accepting that U.S. political priorities will override Canadian defense needs. Third, validating the idea that American threats are effective. And fourth, and most critically, accepting that Canadian airspace is effectively American airspace, subject to Washington's approval. Denmark isn't just regretting a purchase. They're watching their strategic autonomy dissolve in real time. And they're trying to warn Canada before it's irreversible. Yarlov has publicly stated he doesn't know whether the F-35 contains a kill switch and that Denmark can't rely on American assurances. He says the U.S. could disable Denmark's Air Force simply by stopping parts deliveries. He even warned that Washington could threaten Denmark over Greenland by leveraging its control over the jets. This isn't speculation. It's a senior defense official describing a security risk created by American weapons dependency. And here's how that leverage works in practice. Earlier this year, the U.S. removed F-35 components stored in Denmark, paid for by Denmark, and shipped them elsewhere. Denmark couldn't block the decision because under the F-35 program, spare parts remain U.S. property until installed. Canada would face the same arrangement. Parts stored in Canadian hangars, purchased with Canadian tax dollars, would still belong to Washington. The choice facing Canada now is stark. Accept dependency and conditional sovereignty, or choose strategic independence. This isn't about jets anymore. It's about who controls Canada. So I'll leave you with the simplest question of all. Whose airspace is this?